You're listening to the Something in the Wilderness podcast. I hope you don't mind, but today we're doing something a little bit different here. I really enjoy going through all of Andrew McMahon's catalog, and that's not going to stop, but sometimes I think we need a little slight tangent here and there. I see these as opportunities to share something new with the Andrew McMahon fan community and maybe expose them to something they haven't heard of or maybe something they can learn more about. My name's Steve, and if you've tuned in before, you know that I always choose one Andrew McMahon song from the catalog, but this time around we're technically talking about a song from a different artist altogether. This song does feature Andrew McMahon on vocals, so it is relevant to the topic. Today I've enlisted a Jukebox the Ghost fan, who's also a returning guest, to help me break down their collaboration with Andrew. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something new about a different artist in the piano rock genre. So welcome to the show, Chantel.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back. It's been about 2 years since we talked, and I know you've had some milestones in your life, I think, since we last talked, right? Did you graduate from college? Is that right?
I did, in fact, graduate from college.
That's excellent. Yeah, last time you were a student, and now you're a graduate, and
indeed.
Awesome. Anything else new with you that to update anybody listening?
I've actually gotten a bit into concert photography. I went to school for audio engineering, and the goal is to eventually be doing something to do with live music. So I've kind of found a little bit of a different avenue in for now.
That's awesome. So do you photograph artists like when they come to your area, or do you travel, or what's that like?
I live in Connecticut. We're not like the biggest tourist stop for most artists. We've been lucky that we've gotten some really cool talent in the last few years, but mostly local stuff for the sake of convenience. But I'm in New York and Boston semi-often enough for shows. So
that's not too far of a drive for you then?
It's about 2 hours to Boston in the car, or I'll normally take the train to New York, which is probably also like 2 hours.
Okay, very cool. And you just take all your equipment with you and go down and photograph a concert?
Yeah, it's pretty portable. I can kind of fit everything in a little backpack, so.
Nice. So I've seen pictures. I think you took pictures of was it Stephen Kellogg recently?
Yeah, he's awesome.
Okay.
He's actually a Connecticut local, so I didn't know him all that well. I just saw that he was playing a show like half an hour from my house a while ago, so I went and I left a very, very big fan. So.
Oh, you didn't know his music at that point?
No, I guess it's like a tradition of his that like at the end of every year he'll play a show at it's called Fairfield Theater Company in Fairfield. And I guess he's from Fairfield County. So I had just like seen that he was playing there and recognized his name, and I was like, hey, no, I'll go shoot this show. And I ended up really loving his music, and I got to shoot it again opening for Matt Nathanson a couple weeks ago, which was awesome.
I feel like a lot of Andrew McMahon fans are Stephen Kellogg fans. I don't know what the connection is. I haven't ever dove into his catalog. I've just kind of listened to some of his stuff here and there, but
yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap. They kind of appeal to a lot of the same demographic of people. I believe he opened the Dear Jack benefit a couple years ago too. So I think a lot of people might have found him that way.
I think you're right. I think I've heard that.
He's a good dude.
That tour came through here, well, nearby here. Cincinnati's like 2.5 hours for me. I considered going. I'm not familiar with either of the artists, but again, I feel like a lot of Andrew McMahon fans like Matt Nathanson and Stephen Kellogg, so I almost was tempted to go, but ultimately decided against it. So I think they were just here last weekend, actually.
Oh, nice.
I believe we're well into a phase of Andrew's career that what I like to call the collaboration era. He's collaborating with a lot of different artists on these last couple of standalone singles that he released in the last few years. And now he has a new album coming out later this month, which I definitely want to ask you about as well, what your thoughts are on that. So the song we're talking about today is actually a song by Jukebox the Ghost, who it sounds like you're familiar with. And Andrew contributed vocals to the track. And from my understanding, and maybe you know a little bit more about this, I don't think they've ever had any other vocalist on a Jukebox the Ghost song except for the three of them. Is that right?
I'd actually never thought of that, but I think you're right.
I think that's what they said on a live stream last year. I was really surprised. Like, they're like, this is the first time we've had someone else like featured, is the way they put it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So the song we're going to talk about today is Wasted, but I also want to learn more about Jukebox the Ghost while we're at it. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right. Well, let me tell you about my story, how I learned about Jukebox the Ghost, and yours is probably different. Maybe not. Maybe it's not so different, though. So I went to the Bunbury Music Festival in Cincinnati a few years back. It was in 2019. It was actually, almost 4 years ago. So I went to Bunbury for the second year in a row, and I was actually a volunteer. I kind of found an in for like a $200 festival, 3-day festival, by the way, which seems unheard of nowadays. And I got in for free just by volunteering for 2 4-hour shifts. So it was a really sweet deal. So I did it the year Andrew McMahon was there in 2018. And then in 2019, it was coming back around. And I was like, oh, I'm getting on that volunteer list again. I don't even care who's playing. Well, it turned out to be bands I love like Fall Out Boy and Stone Temple Pilots and Sublime with Rome and Greta Van Fleet and some new artists I had never heard of. So I saw this band named Jukebox the Ghost on the bill. And I was like, well, I think I checked out a few songs from a bunch of artists, right? But they're the ones that really stuck with me. And I was like, I have to see this artist. Like I listened to, their top tracks on Spotify or whatever. I may have even watched a music video. And I was like, that's the artist I want to make. So I kind of scheduled my volunteer shifts around those other bands I mentioned and Jukebox the Ghost. The album I listened to most was their newest album at the time. I think it was only like a year old. It was Off to the Races. I loved every single song on that album. And I still love, like I was listening to it just the other day, and I was like, yeah, I still love every single song on here. And I've been following them ever since, listened to their new album as well, and I really love that one as well. And I follow them on social media and like the other things they're doing right now. And I just love kind of everything about them. Chantel, how did you find out about Jukebox the Ghost? Like, how did you get into them?
So I had kind of known of them a little more casually for a long time. I actually started listening to them probably not a whole lot of time before you did. I have a friend, Sophia, who's like a huge fan of theirs, and they were doing like this album release party in New York City for Off to the Races, and she really wanted to go, but she didn't want to go alone. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll go with you for fun or whatever. And then, so, the album Off to the Races, they happen to have this little rainbow horse on the cover, which if you know me at all, you know that I'm a horse girl.
Yeah.
But the band was kind of hanging around and, answering questions and stuff. And like everyone else there had like these wonderful, thoughtful questions. And I'm like, oh no, like I don't know anything about them. I gotta come up with something to ask. And so I ended up just asking about the horse on the cover. And it kind of just turned into this really long conversation with Tommy. It was pretty hilarious. And then at that point I was like, okay, well, now I'm invested.
Yeah.
Now I'm here to stay. Yeah, it kind of just went from there, and they're based, or at least they were based in New York for a really long time. So they've played a bunch of shows around here that I've been lucky to go see. But it literally just stemmed from my friend inviting me to this album release party and the fact that they happened to have a horse on their album cover. So
hey, if it's whatever works, right? A horse pulled you in,
right.
and then you became a fan. The connection between an artist that when they talk to their fans like that is so important. And it, like it did for you with Jukebox the Ghost, I think it helps me a lot feel connected to an artist. The ones I've met, it doesn't mean like I'm more of a fan than maybe other artists that I love, but it's a different kind. It's like, okay, now I have this personal connection, even if I just got to ask them a question or got a signature or something. It's like a different thing now. I think it's a really good idea when artists try to meet their fans when they can, and I know they can't always do that, but that's super cool. So they just came out after the show was over?
It wasn't even a show. I'm completely forgetting where it was. It was in this like, it wasn't a studio, but it was some sort of like listening space.
Oh,
where they just
I
had
assumed
like
they
the
played
album.
a show.
No, yeah, they just had the album like on like some sort of iTunes thing where we could listen to it early, and then they just had like a little hangout Q&A session after. So
Oh, that's really cool. And Tommy, you mentioned Tommy, he's the guitarist, right?
it's the roles are a little bit complicated because he and Ben both sing, like they kind of split the vocal part. And Jesse also sings a little bit. So
Yeah, I've heard songs with all three, different songs with each of them singing on it. So that's pretty interesting that you got three people in a band and they've all sang songs for them. But yeah, it sounds like Tommy and then the piano player Ben are the primary singers. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Okay. Do you know? Did they write? If Tommy's singing, does that mean he wrote the song? And if Ben's singing, that means he wrote it? Is that how it works? I don't know.
I think that's kind of how they tend to do things. I know at least on Cheers, their most recent album, I think they mentioned doing a little bit more of like writing for each other.
Oh.
There was a lot of like experimentation, trying new things that they did on that album that they hadn't before. So, but for the most part, I think they tend to sing lead on the songs that they wrote.
Well, I've got some stats on the song Wasted by Jukebox the Ghost featuring Andrew McMahon. It is track 3 on the 6th studio album by the band. titled Cheers. So that's the name of the album. It was also a single off of the album. And the album came out just under a year ago, actually, May 27th, 2022. So it's still what I consider a fairly new album. Like, I still feel like, to me, it just still feels new. I mean, they're still touring on it. They still promote it, that sort of thing. But I remember, I don't know if you were on this live stream a year ago. So it was almost exactly a year ago. I think it was in February of 2022. They did a live stream, and they had advertised it ahead of time, and they said on social media, and they said, hey, we're going to have Andrew McMahon on to talk about the song that he's going to be featured on. And they hadn't released the song yet. So I was super excited, being a diehard Andrew fan, of course, and just recently getting into this band. And they did, and it was so casual. Were you on that where the four of them were just talking?
Yeah, I was.
I thought so. So sometimes on live streams, like if we're watching Andrew live streams, sometimes I'll see your name and stuff.
I do like to stalk the comments for my friends.
Yeah,
so.
it's so cool. It feels like you're in this community where when you sign on to these events, it's like, oh, I know her. I know him. I know that person. Oh, look, that person's asking a question. I've met them before. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It just, again, it's about that connection. I think it just makes us feel a little bit more connected to what's going on. On that live stream, they talked about the upcoming single. It was released on March 11th, the actual single. But I remember all we had at that point was just a clip of the song, I think on Instagram or something. And I don't know about you, but from the moment I heard that clip, I was like, I'm going to love this song. I tell you what, I don't feel that way about every song I listen to. It's rare that I hear a song and I'm like, I'm going to love this right away. So I don't know. What was your first impression? Do you remember hearing that just a clip of the chorus before it came out?
So I had a little bit of like intel on this from a while ago. I think the first like mention that this existed was actually in like November 2019. And I remember this like so clearly because I was in LA for the Dear Jack benefit. And apparently Ben was also in LA because This Fiction, which is like Jukebox's management or label, I'm not sure what specifically their title is, but had posted like one singular photo from this writing session. And of course, like all of my friends immediately are like, have you seen this?
It was Andrew with the band?
It was just Andrew and Ben, like after some sort of writing session that they'd had.
Oh, okay.
I saw that and I was like, oh, I'm going to be really excited about this. And then, of course, it was like over a year before anything came of it, or over 2 years, I think, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Ben also has a Patreon for like his solo music and for other stuff, but he had previewed a little bit of it for his subscribers a while ago. So I had heard it a little while ago and was kind of very anxiously, not so patiently waiting to get more about it. So
you had some insider info, and
I did.
Man, but it was hard enough to wait a couple of months, like, or maybe a month or whatever, by the time I knew about it up until the point where it was released. I can't imagine waiting like a year and a half or.
I don't know. I was like losing it, seriously.
Yeah, I bet.
And like very much like two of my absolute favorite artists, and like knowing that there was a collaboration out there, like in the wind somewhere waiting to come out.
Right. I was pumped for it when like I said, I just heard that little clip. Do you know when the song was recorded? Because I don't have any idea on any of that. Like, I know very little about the production of this album. They've said a few things, but do you know specifically about this song when about it was recorded?
I know it was written like at the end of 2019. I'm not sure about the actual recording. I imagine a lot of that was probably done like remotely. Mm-hmm. I know at least like with the rest of Cheers, a lot of the fact that that's like so much more experimental and so different is that they had kind of this independence of recording independently from each other a lot of the time. Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I imagine it was not quite all, physically in the same space.
And that makes sense for especially the timing of it. I'm assuming that Andrew recorded his part separately and sent it over, but we probably don't know for sure, but we can probably assume that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did hear them say, though, that this album was the longest they've ever worked on an album, but that probably fits within the whole, like, doing things in such a different fashion than they ever have before. It's like you have to figure it out before you can actually record an album, I guess.
I know a lot of it was kind of very self-produced too. Like, there's a song called Brass Band that I think Ben said is like the first song that he's like fully produced completely on his own.
I love that song.
It's such a good song.
I just think it's one of the coolest songs they have, actually. It's so unique. It's unlike anything else I probably listened to.
Yeah.
That was another one. When they posted the clip of that one to promote that one coming out, that was another one that I was like, what is this? I have to hear more. sort of thing. So yeah, that's in my regular rotation as much as Wasted is
Yeah.
actually. I love that song.
And the other really cool thing about it kind of being in this, like being produced in this time where everyone just had more time to do things is like, I think they've spoken about this, but the song Hey Maud is like ridiculously old. There's like some older version of that existed like 10, 15 plus years ago. In theory, you could say that this album took like over 10 years to make. So,
Yeah, I did see a mention of that. Like, I don't know if it was a picture or short video they posted when the album came out, but yeah, about how, this was a song they were playing back in college at Georgetown in like 2005 or 2006 or something. That's crazy. I kind of like that. I like when artists, they write all these songs, right? Not every song makes the album. Then they can go back and be like, hey, you know that song we wrote 15 years ago? Let's try it with what we know now today and the tools we have today and make something of it. And that's what they did. So
and like to think about it, that probably wouldn't have happened if not for the pandemic. That's probably a good part of why they decided to pull that out. So, which is pretty cool.
yeah, definitely. I agree with you. So I know that they built a studio in New York City, and that's where they recorded all, if not the majority, or whichever one of them was based in New York City, put it together or whatever. So I think it's worth noting that this is again, I've said this earlier, I guess, but it's worth noting that, again, this is the first time in 6 albums they've ever had someone featured, another artist featured. They've worked with producers, they've worked with other writers, but this is the first time they've had another artist featured on the song itself, so where you can hear them. So I think that's quite a compliment to Andrew McMahon, but it seems like they're friends. Like, it seems like they're kind of the same world and have been kind of in the same orbit for the last at least decade or so. I know they've toured together, right?
I think so, sometime long before I listened to either of them,
Okay, yeah,
sadly.
you're in the
But
same position I like before.
yeah.
Yeah, we were in the picture of Jukebox the Ghost, but yeah, and I saw your comment on Camp Wilderness. I feel the same way. Like, Jukebox the Ghost. If Andrew asked his fans like, hey, who should we think about co-headlining a tour with, and we were both like Jukebox the Ghost, of course. So
Literally would be like Stuff of Dreams if they did a co-headline. I would drop everything.
yeah, and I think there's a lot of fans that feel the same way of both artists. So I also think that those two artists, like, if you're not familiar with Jukebox the Ghost, you either would like them or at least have a good time at their show. Being an Andrew fan.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think it would be a good pairing. So I did read that Brian Phillips produced this track, and they had never worked with Brian Phillips before this time. And I don't really know much about him, but I do want to take this opportunity, if you don't mind. Can you just kind of so when you found out about them in 2019, and you went back, and I remember on the podcast 2 years ago, you telling me about how the first time you ever heard Andrew McMahon was his self-titled album, and I was like, oh, so you had all that previous stuff to go like dig back into. Was that what the experience was like for you with Jukebox? Did you like go back to their previous 4 albums or no?
It definitely took me a while to do that, especially because there's just so much variation in their music. Like, they really haven't ever done the same thing twice.
I agree.
So, like, just because, I heard Off to the Races and I love that, that didn't necessarily mean that, like, their first album, like What Living Let Ghost, is so wildly different. And I mean, I love it too,
Mm-hmm.
but it definitely was a bit of an undertaking to kind of get through that. But yeah, it definitely took my time getting back through everything, and getting to see them live definitely
Mm-hmm.
helped. They play a good assortment, so a lot of it would be like, oh, I heard them play this song live, I'm gonna go listen to it on Spotify and let the rest of the album play or whatever.
Yeah, it definitely seems like they have some fan favorites that they play a lot in concert. Like, if you look at their set lists online, and I know you've seen them in concert. I've seen them once, which I'll talk about. But yeah, so it definitely seems like they have their regular songs that they play in addition to the new stuff, of course, to promote. I guess you answered my next question. Like, their style has changed over the last 15 years, you'd say, and I would agree with that. It does feel different going back to those other albums. So do you feel like you have the history and nostalgia with those older albums, or would you say you're a newer fan in the way? I know technically you're a newer fan, but would you say like you're a fan of the whole catalog, or do you focus more on the present?
I'm definitely a fan of their whole catalog. And I mean, at this point, I've been pretty like keyed into their music for like a good 5 or so years. But, when you consider the fact that, like you said, they were making music together in college, however many years ago that was, that's in retrospect, like a fairly small portion of their career still.
Yeah, certainly. But the band stated last year on social media that there's like themes to a couple of their albums. They compared Cheers to Live and Let Ghosts as like their theme albums. Do you know anything about that? Was there like a theme on Live and Let Ghosts that you're aware of? Because I don't know anything about that besides what they said.
Well, Live and Let Ghost is very like they have a lot of songs about the end of the world. And that's a lot in part of a lot of that's owed to Tommy. He loves to write about the apocalypse, which, relatable.
So that's a true
But
story. That's funny because I've heard that and I was like, I thought that was just a joke or something.
no, that's very much a consistent theme in his writing. And I think like
Different?
one of the stories they like to tell at their shows is they were at college together and they all kind of went off and did like a semester abroad in different places. And this is so like really the whole band in a nutshell is like Ben went off and he came back from his study abroad with like this all these beautiful like soaring love songs written, and then Tommy came back from his semester abroad with a concept album about the end of the world. So and they kind of like put it together and it became What Live and Let Ghost. So
Okay, now I'm going to go back to that album with a different set of ears. I really am. I'm going to do what I usually do with albums, and I'm going to listen like right through, which I'll admit I haven't done with any Jukebox the Ghost album except for their last two where I listen beginning to end. It's always been like, oh, I'll shuffle on Spotify. But I actually do. Now I want to go listen to that album and just see. But it sounds like so it sounds like it has pretty different vibes throughout, though. So that'll be interesting to listen for.
I think that's a lot of like why the band works so well. Like Ben and Tommy being kind of, for the most part, the primary songwriters, they have like such different approaches to writing, both like lyrically and musically. They're so different, but they really complement each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they both have solo albums out. And honestly, listening to each of their solo records is probably like the best explanation of their different styles. Because like Ben's is this beautiful, like super melodic, like really flowing, gorgeous album with a bunch of love songs, and then Tommy's is like this very kind of quirky, like experimental, like apocalyptic thing. And they're both so cool, and I love both of them, and they're just so different. And I think that's why they work so well together.
So this all explains why when I do listen to their albums and even the whole catalog on shuffle. They're not just vocally, because they do have very different voices, which I like. I like the fact they're so different, but their songs do sound pretty different from each other. I mean, you can definitely tell when it's usually tell when it's a Tommy song versus a Ben song. And I don't think it's just like the fact that Ben's pretty focused on the piano and Tommy's more on guitar. I think there's just some stark differences between a lot of the things that they write. So, but that explains it. And I didn't even know they had solo albums, so I got more to check out now.
The way I've kind of always thought of it and explained it is Ben's writing to me is very melodically driven, while Tommy's feels very rhythmically driven. Like if you kind of took away even just like the tone of their voices and just listen to like the actual music, like if you had a lead sheet written or something, Ben's kind of is very like the movement is really driven by the melody versus Tommy's that has like a very percussive type of vibe to it, I guess.
Now I know you play piano, and I think you play other instruments, is right?
A little bit, mostly just piano.
So would you say when you play you're more, and this is probably an obvious question since Ben plays the piano, would you say you're more like that style, or?
I definitely think like I kind of appreciate a mix between the two. Like I love, the whole end of the world thing that Tommy has going on. Like I literally wrote a review of his solo album for school.
Nice.
But yeah, I really appreciate like, especially like if I play like for like solo piano or whatever, like having the percussive elements is super fun, but having these like really beautiful and like complex melodies is also a wonderful thing. So
it seems like it really works for Jukebox the Ghost, at least for fans like yourself,
yeah.
because of that stark contrast and combination between them. Let's talk live shows for a little bit here. We've touched on it just a little bit. I know you've seen them live, so I was excited to look at set list of Jukebox the Ghost and see that they actually did play Wasted last year on tour, knowing that Andrew sings part of it, a small part of it, but still a part of it. So maybe there's a chance we'll hear it again on the next tour. So those of you listening, if you don't know, Jukebox the Ghost goes on tour at the end of this month, March into mid-April. And they are coming to Columbus, where I live. And it seems like they almost always come to Columbus, which is just so cool because I got to admit, there's so many times that I complain about, oh, this artist, most artists don't come to Columbus. They go to Cincinnati and they go to Cleveland, and each one's like a 2.5 hour drive for me. So it's really nice when they come to Columbus, really close to where I live. But Jukebox the Ghost almost always comes to Columbus, which is awesome. Do you think we can expect to hear Wasted again, or?
I think most likely. I think they've played it at pretty much every show they've done at least since it came out as a single.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. I mean, since it was a single from Cheers, it definitely, I think, is up there if you like look at Spotify streams or whatever. So I have a feeling that or at least I hope it will stay in the set for a little while because it's a great song.
I hope so too. I'm considering going, so I've thought about buying a ticket and I haven't pulled the trigger on that yet. So
You should totally go. You'll have a great time.
yeah, because I've only seen them. So I've only seen them at that festival again, 2019. So it's not only been almost 4 years, but it was just a short festival set. It wasn't like even a full jukebox set. So I think I'm definitely due. So when you heard Wasted played live last year, I assume you went to the show last year.
Yeah.
Did Ben do all the vocals for the song, or did Tommy and him trade off?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Ben's just been doing vocals for the whole thing. I think it would be super neat if Tommy did Andrew's verse. I think they have a lot of like really similar vocal qualities, which is why I think Andrew works on the song so well for like the same reason that like Tommy and Ben's voices work so well together.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll have to pitch that idea to them.
Yeah. So if they hear this, that would be fantastic. You guys should definitely do that. Consider it. So I did actually have a ticket to see Jukebox the Ghost a second time, and I got to admit I did not go the second time. It was in October 2021 for their Halloween show. So when I saw them at Bunbury back in 2019, they played Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. And as a brand new fan, like I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea where that was coming from. I was like, they're doing Queen? This is like so random. Like what? And then after they played that song, they kind of reused it to promote, hey, we do Halloween shows every October. You guys should come check us out when we do it in your area. And I was like, after that performance, I was like, I am going to the Halloween show as soon as it's anywhere in Ohio or nearby. I don't care. But the timing was awful. I was about to get on the rock boat in early November. And if you tested positive for COVID, you could not get on the boat, rightfully so, and you shouldn't have. But so I was so paranoid. So I skipped the Andrew Three Pianos shows that fall, and I skipped the Jukebox show. Fortunately, they live streamed the one from Chicago, and I was able to watch it at home. So if you count live streams, I guess I've seen them twice, but I did pay for a ticket and I watched it at home. And what was really cool about that is, I'm pretty sure before that moment, my wife had no idea who Jukebox the Ghost was. Obviously, this was well before their Andrew collaboration. And she walked in, she came in at the end of their originals set, and she actually sat down and was kind of enjoying it. And I was like, wow. She doesn't normally just listen to live music, random artists that she doesn't know. So that was pretty impressive. But then they went into the Queen stuff a little while later, and she was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, right? That's what I was trying to tell you. Because I told her about that Bohemian Rhapsody performance, and I was blown away. And I was like, I had to see the rest of it. And by then they've recorded a couple of Queen covers and put them out on streaming, so you can catch them there as well. But have you by chance been to a Halloween show?
I have only ever been once. I went in 2019, and then I had a ticket for both of the past 2 years, and I ended up being sick both of the times.
Oh.
Not COVID, just very unfortunate timing.
Yeah.
But they live streamed last year's too. I probably watched the one that they streamed from Chicago as well, because I was probably at home sick for that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Halloween is always a total blast. It's not a stretch of the imagination to say that their music is very Queen inspired, so it's kind of a very natural progression.
Because I failed to do so, I just realized, can you describe for the listeners, what is Halloween? I guess I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, so every year towards the end of October, they'll do a handful of shows where they'll do a full set of their original music, and then they'll do a full set of Queen covers. And it's always a blast. Did you have a costume contest and everything? Ben does a whole thing where he'll grow out his beard for a month, and then in between sets of the first show, he'll go backstage and shave it into the Freddie Mercury mustache. But yeah, they do that every year, and they call it Halloween, and it's a great time.
Even on a live stream, and I like live streams, but it was pretty impressive to watch that all happen. And they're very talented musicians across the board, whether they're playing someone else's music or their own. And before I heard them play Bohemian Rhapsody, and even before that live stream, If you told me there was a band that played all Queen covers, I would have been like, well, there's no way they're going to be able to like play it like Queen does, but they do a pretty solid job. So, like I said, I was impressed. My wife was impressed. But I was really excited that she's become a slight bit more of a fan of Jukebox the Ghost in time based on that and some other things we'll get to. So how many times, do you know how many times you've seen this band in concert? I don't know if you keep track of that like I do.
I have like an account on this website called Concert
Mm-hmm.
Archives, mostly because my memory's really bad.
No, I use it too. I think it's fun to track that.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but I'm definitely a little bit spoiled because they play in New York City pretty often.
Mm-hmm.
So I've definitely seen them quite a few times at this point.
Pretty much when they come around, you'll go out to see them.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
They're one of those that if they're in the vicinity, I will be there.
Excellent. Okay, I get that. I've got a few of those artists myself. So, all right, let's talk songwriting on Wasted for a little bit here. So, most of Jukebox the Ghost songs, like if you look at the official credits, I think most of them are credited to all members of the band. Does it specify in the liner? Because I don't own any of their CDs or record albums. Does it specify like who wrote each song in their liner notes? Do you know? It seems to me like on Wikipedia, and it says all members for their albums wrote the songs. Is that?
I'm not totally sure about like as far as like liner notes or whatever, but I do know that they tend to be very collaborative about it. Like even if, it's a primarily Ben written song or Tommy written song or whatever, it's still like they're very good about having all three of them kind of contribute their own little part to it.
Mm-hmm.
And all three of them have solo music, so it kind of makes sense. Like, well, if we're going to make this a jukebox song, it needs to be a collaborative effort. So
Even their drummer has solo music too?
yeah, he does. He's been a little bit, I think, a little more shy about putting it out there, but he recently made a Patreon page and has a couple tunes out there. So
Okay, wow. I assume with this song that Andrew wrote the verse that he sings on, but I really don't know. I'm pretty confident Andrew didn't write any piano or play any piano on it, but I don't really know that. Do you know if Andrew wrote his own part, or do we not know that?
I do know Ben came up with the little like piano hook. The little piano hook was definitely like came out of his brain. I'm not sure about the lyrics. I do know at one point Ben talked about kind of where the lyrics came from, and the story was I think he had just moved to New York when he was, I assume, like 25, like it says in the lyrics. But it was during Hurricane Irene, I think, and he and a bunch of his friends went out onto the Brooklyn Queens Expressway at like 2 a.m, and when there was like a calm during the storm. So it like quite literally was, in the middle of a hurricane.
25 years
But
old in the middle of a hurricane. Wow, I didn't
yeah,
know those lyrics are so literal. I had no idea.
pretty much, yeah. It definitely came from that sort of personal experience.
Uh-huh.
But, as music is, you can kind of contribute your own meaning to it. And I'm sure that Andrew was able to find some sort of way in there on his own as far as the meaning goes.
Yeah, because I definitely think it's like a nostalgic, like whatever age you are, you're looking back on the life you've lived up to that point. Man, I always took that to mean like it's been 25 years, but I guess at that point his life had been 25 years. So I guess it's all the same. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. So I mentioned Brian Phillips earlier, and I forgot, I failed to mention this there. On Genius.com, which is another website I use to find out, who wrote which songs and who produced and whatnot, it does say Brian Phillips was also a co-writer on it, which I guess is becoming, I don't know if it's becoming more common, but I'm hearing about it more in these last few years because that's kind of the way Andrew does music now too, where he'll bring different producers in, different co-writers, and they'll all just kind of collaborate on a song together. So I don't know if that's how this song came together, but I do know among certain sources, Brian Phillips is listed both a producer and a co-writer. So I don't know. He's also written songs with Walk the Moon and El King. I'm actually reading a book right now. Have you ever heard of the songwriter Sam Hollander?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm reading his book right now, and it's really giving me a lot of insight into the whole like professional songwriter lifestyle or career, I should say, is a better word for it. Just really interesting. Just a world I never knew anything about. Like I always thought of artists write songs and then they record them and then they put them out. I never thought of like finding someone to help you write a song until recently, and it's given me a different perspective on the music industry, and I think it's pretty interesting to learn about that other side of it. There's a whole, and I'm sure that's something that you're familiar with, being in an audio engineering program that you graduated from. Can we talk about that for a moment? I don't know, just kind of go off on a tangent. When you say audio engineering, can you tell me what that is and what an audio engineer does? Because I really just I have no idea what that person does.
It's definitely a broad term.
Mm-hmm.
The specific title of my degree was music and sound recording.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically the program I did was a Bachelor of Science. So I had to take a couple of like electrical engineering and analogs classes like that. So like the role is generally like when you think of audio engineering, it's broken down to like studio engineering or live engineering.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that has to do with like physically, getting the cables patched where they need to get sound where it needs to go, and routing signal around so that it does the thing that you want it to do, which that alone is incredibly complicated and I'm very much still learning.
Wow.
But yeah, in a studio setting, I think this kind of goes back to what you were saying about producers being credited as songwriters. When you're doing that and you're helping quite literally like produce the sound, I think it's pretty much impossible to not get caught up into like, you're going to have some sort of creative input, even
Mm-hmm.
though like being the engineer is not quite the same as being the producer. The producer definitely has more creative input. Like the credits on a song, I think a lot of it has to do with like politics and like how, royalties are being allocated or whatever. It's pretty difficult for at least a producer to not have some sort of creative like sprinkling in a song. Like they're going to have their mark on it one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you listen to anything like Jack Antonoff's produced, like you can tell in a second that he, anything he touches, like you can tell, like, oh, Jack worked on that. And then the other side of it would be like live engineering, which is what I'm trying to get more into,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably a lot more technical, basically making the band sound good and doing all the many things to make that work.
That sounds like a lot of pressure.
It's fun. I mean, I'd actually interviewed Morgan Peros for a school project a while ago, and she said something really interesting that kind of stuck with me about music being like a very leave no trace form of art and form of expression, and that like you do the thing and then it's gone. And
Hmm.
that was very cool to think about, especially from like a live perspective,
Yeah.
being a very perfectionistic person. There's something very cool about like you get to go do the thing and you get to make it cool and awesome and great and sound amazing, and then it's gone. And whether it was really good or it was terrible, once the show's over, it's gone.
Yeah, well, first off, I'm jealous you got to talk to Morgan. I mean, I'm a big fan. I know that she tours with, she toured with Andrew for a while, but then she's been touring with other artists as well. She's super talented. I've had the good fortune of seeing her perform, her instruments live a few times on stage, and I'm always blown away. But that's super cool and really interesting what she said and what you're saying about that whole. You basically create this atmosphere or production or thing that people experience for that time, and then it's gone. Let's talk about the sound of Wasted a little bit. We've touched on it a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Like I talked about earlier, so I talked about this song in the way that when I first heard it, or when I even first heard the clip, I knew I was going to love it, and that went for like the whole song too. The other song that came to mind, so when I kind of like was writing a little bit of notes down here about, talking about this song, another song I thought of Andrew McMahon's that happened with is House in the Trees. It's like from the first notes, I knew I loved it, which again, it's actually a rare thing. So I know you got to hear this song early, and you knew a little bit about it. So even like who was involved aside, did you enjoy it the first time you heard it? What were your initial thoughts?
I mean, I loved it the first time I heard it, and there's not a whole lot in either of those artist catalogs that I don't at least like to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I think it came at like a very cool time in both of their careers, which kind of drew me in a little bit, especially for Andrew, honestly, like coming in between Upside Down Flowers, which is like this very nostalgia driven thing, and then this new record that's coming out that at least seems to be a lot more like future focused, more looking forward than back so much. It's a very nostalgic song, but it's more like nostalgic for, I guess, the freedom of being young, not necessarily for the actual like experience
Right.
of being young, but for just like the recklessness, I guess, and that whole like sense of freedom. And I think that's like is a cool time where it came for Jukebox the Ghost as well, because they were writing this album where they were taking a lot more creative liberties.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, specifically like in the context of Andrew's music, I think it came at a very cool time because it's, nostalgic while still kind of having this future focused energy, I guess, which the new album seems to be a lot of that, appreciative of the past, but here I'm going to look towards the future and, harness the same feeling of like freedom and self-expression that I had, however many years ago.
I think you put that very well. I mean, that's that thought of the time in each of their careers and where they're at and kind of, like you said, looking back, but also looking forward. What I hear when I hear this song, honestly, the chorus sounds to me, and again, I'm not nearly as familiar with Jukebox the Ghost's back catalog, but the chorus sounds to me more like an Andrew McMahon song than a jukebox song. But I guess that's hard to say because I'll take it back to your earlier point because there's music so diverse in itself.
Right, yeah.
It's like they've done everything, they've done every kind of. Jukebox the Ghost is not just one thing. I can't really say that it sounds more like an Andrew song. It sounds like a Jukebox the Ghost song because they sound like all things at the same time.
And I think they sound so much like each other too, especially like the more recent music, like Off to the Races, which is a lot more heavily pop driven and I guess more commercial sounding in a lot of ways than their back catalog. I don't think saying that they have a similar sound is too much of a stretch.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody if they heard something like $1 Million Bills or even Brass Band, I guess, or Fred Astaire or Jump Started, and they're like, oh, that's a goofy band. Like, I don't really like goofy music, and that's kind of goofy. Like, what would you say to that? Because I know they make very different types of music across the board, and you and I both know that they have pretty serious stuff, too. But, like, do you consider them a goofy band?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, and I don't necessarily mean that in, like, the sense that, like, oh, their music is goofy and, like, not serious, but they definitely have, like, this joyfulness and playfulness about them that you kind of see throughout.
I mean, it's fun.
Yeah. At one point, I forget where, I think it might have been Ben who said this on like a Patreon thing, but they kind of like modeled a lot of like who they are as a band after the band Guster, which if you've ever seen Guster live, you know that they're a lot like that too. There's a lot of like fun, there's a lot of play,
Yeah.
People don't do music as like a smart career choice. They do it because they love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they love it.
You kind of have to keep that, or what's the point?
I have seen Guster live. I worked security for them back in college, which is really random.
No.
I'm not a security guard type at all. Anybody who's met me knows that, or seen me even. Basically, they just needed a college student to stand by their dressing room door because it was like this room they played in the student union, and I mean it was not like a concert venue at all. And like someone just had to stand in the way so that nobody would go in the room. And I did my job. Nobody went in there. And I didn't know Guster at the time, so like I wasn't even like fanboying or anything. Like I was just like, oh, it's just a band. Like I like some of their music, and it was after that point. So I loved it so much that I actually checked them all out after that. And I'm a big Guster fan now, but I wasn't at the time. So yeah, I do love Guster. I feel like Guster's music is mostly serious, but yeah, they do have some goofier stuff. And you're right, their stage antics are where they get playful. I like the way you put it. So I mentioned some jukebox songs that are a little bit more on the playful, fun, whatever you want to call it side. Wasted, I don't feel that way about. I feel like it's a pretty serious topic.
Kind of the thing that they're really good at is writing about like pretty serious stuff, but making it sound kind of fun still. Everything Under the Sun is a lot like that. There's a lot of like heavier lyrical topics, but it's still like, it's a fun album to listen to. And I think that's definitely a real skill to be able to write about like this kind of freaky stuff and still make it like fun to listen to.
I assume you're referring to the apocalyptic stuff?
Yeah, a lot of that.
I know to look out for that now or listen for it
like
now.
Heavier, sadder topics, like even Safe Travels lyrically is a kind of bittersweet, sadder album, but it's still fun to listen to. Like there's a song on that specifically called Adulthood that Wasted kind of reminds me of like the opposite side of it, I guess. And adulthood is, I don't know if I want to say sad, but it's definitely not the lightest topic, but it's a banger. Like it's fun to listen to,
Hey, sad's okay with me. I like sad music. So I mean, it's, anything that makes me feel. If we're talking the category of fun and joyful, like definitely the song fits in because I may call it serious in the way of lyrics and serious in I guess the way it makes me feel. It kind of gives me this like nostalgic feeling myself, like House in the Trees. It's like, I remember saying that about that song, and I've said it probably more than once about that one. It's like when I hear it, I think back to a time in my life that was way before that song ever came out. So that's kind of how I feel about Wasted. It's like I can relate to the lyrics to that degree in Wasted. That it's like, oh yeah, I kind of think back on my life. Very retrospective, so.
I could definitely see that, and maybe I don't feel that so much given the fact that I'm like not even 25, so I don't have that like, but it
I'm a little
definitely
bit
has
older.
like this it definitely has this like joyful, youthful energy about it. And honestly reminds me a lot of skywriting in that way, that it's just like, I'm gonna go have fun and be free and enjoy that part of life and not taking everything so seriously.
Yeah, the chorus is so singable. I mean, it's like when I hear that, if I'm in my car, I want to roll the windows down and sing it as loud as I can. If I'm around the house, like I'll sing it. And I got to say, going back, so I mentioned my wife earlier and how when she saw that live stream a couple years ago, she was like, oh, that's pretty impressive. They're pretty good. It was when Jukebox the Ghost teamed up with Andrew that I wouldn't say went all in because I wouldn't say she knows their whole catalog or anything, but like, I hear her listening to Jukebox the Ghost sometimes now, and I'll be in the other room. I'm like, cool. She's listening to Jukebox the Ghost. So it definitely like turned her on to like listening to at least the newer stuff. Like I've played her Off to the Races, and I think she listens to the new album when she's also, but I know Wasted is probably her favorite song of theirs. But I think it's that chorus. She really likes strong, like singable pop choruses.
That just reminded me of something that I meant to say earlier about like the songwriting, when talking about like nostalgia versus like future looking. Something that I love about this song that I think is very cool and also like incredibly nerdy. Gonna give you like sort of like a crash course, like bit of a music theory thing. Kind of like the default, I guess, time signature for music is 4/4, which I don't know. Yeah, you seem like you know what I'm saying. But it's like you can
No,
count
I
it,
don't. Am I looking like I knew what? No, I
a
don't
little
know.
bit.
No, but
when you're
but go on.
when you're like feeling the rhythm of music, 4/4 is like you can count it 1, 2, 3, 4,
Okay.
and usually like if you're clapping or whatever, or the snare hits on 2 and 4, and you'll have a kick drum on 1 and 3, and that's kind of very, very standard. The other kind of thing you can do is you can have something called triple meter, which is more like feels like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Swim is like the classic example that I give people for a song in 6/8.
Okay.
But Wasted does a super cool thing where I believe it's technically speaking in 4/4, but there's like this triplet drum feel in the chorus where you can count it as 6 or you can count it as 4. And I've always thought that song in 4/4, it feels very grounded, it feels very stable, but triple meter feels very like rolling forward to me. Like there's a lot of forward momentum to that. And I think, maybe this was on purpose, maybe not. Maybe I'm like attributing my own meaning to it, but it kind of plays into that like really cool balance of, nostalgia for the past, but still looking forward to the future type of thing going on.
Interesting. Well, thanks for the music lesson. Yeah.
That's like my favorite part of the song. I think that's like super cool and clever that they did that. Whether it was on purpose or not, I don't know, but that's like the big thing that drew me into it.
Well, this is why I love bringing other people on the show to talk about their view on the music, because these are things I wouldn't know because I don't understand. I love learning more about music because, yeah, my look earlier was not a look of understanding. It was completely like, it was just interest. It was just like, oh, that's really interesting. But like, I don't know anything about that. But I always want to learn that kind of stuff, though. So I appreciate that.
And Jesse's just like a super awesome drummer, so there's a lot of fun percussion on that if you like go back and listen to all the fun little drum sounds going on. I know little about drums, but he's pretty awesome.
Like I said earlier, it seems like they're all really talented musicians. So I feel like they could play in any genre and they would
Absolutely
know what
yeah.
the heck they're doing. Like, and they'd be able to play whatever. So they could play Queen. I bet they could be a cover band for like any band in any genre. Like they could just do it. They're just that good. And I don't say that about just any artist. And I'm not just saying that about this artist because we're talking about him here. I just think they're a uniquely talented group of guys that play music. That's, took me a long time to find them, but I'm sure glad I did. Let's talk lyrics a little bit. So do you have any standout lyrics to this song?
In the pre-chorus, I really like put our faces to the rain and the wind and the cold. I think in a sense that's a lot of like I kind of hear Andrew's writing in that a little bit. That's very like image based. It's very like perks of being the wallflower, riding in the car with the top down or whatever. So I thought that was a very almost like visceral thing where you listen to that and you're like, oh yeah, like I know what he's saying. I know what that feels like.
It's interesting you say that because something I don't think I mentioned earlier is that on Genius.com, where I saw that Brian Phillips co-wrote this, it did list Ben Thornwell and Andrew McMahon as the writers on the song, which, again, is different from everything I found about the majority of Jukebox the Ghost's catalog, where it says the three members of the band are the writers. I wonder if Andrew did help craft that line, because you're right.
I wouldn't be surprised, especially like knowing how the whole collaboration kind of came to be with this like writing session in LA in 2019 or whatever, being that they're both so like singer-songwriter focused.
Mm-hmm.
I would be surprised if he didn't have anything to do with writing the lyrics. But yeah, I definitely think he had some sort of input in that for sure.
You mentioned these lyrics earlier, but I'm going to restate them. So, we were broke, we were brave, 25 years in a hurricane. I took it as meaning it's been, to me, it means maybe it's been a whirlwind of a life, but maybe he did mean that, but also like literally. Really, my favorite probably lyrics of the song are the chorus. I mean, that's like I think it's because it's so singable. The lyrics I just read, but then we were wild, we were wasted, up all night, we dream all day, almost let you slip away. We were wild, we were wasted, and then running wild in the wasteland, which, kind of fits with the chorus, but I do wonder what he means about that. Like running wild, being young, living this crazy life. I don't know. That's kind of what it means to me.
I think the heart of it is really just, the feeling of freedom and having the world at your fingertips and really just having that, the joy of being uninhibited and not being weighed down. So,
yeah. Well, I like that interpretation for sure. I love the lyrics to this song. I agree with you. You called out the pre-chorus. I think all the verses are very visual. They give me this, just like a lot of Andrew McMahon songs do, they give me this visual of what the character in the song is, them living, what they're going through, that sort of thing. Both the verses are pretty similar, and I do like that. And I have always liked that in pop rock songs or whatever, where they just change a little bit in the lyrics from one place to another, and it keeps you paying attention. I like that trick. Like, I worried about our parents getting older is in the first verse, but in the second verse, I worried about if we were getting older. I love that. And again, it makes me nostalgic for my own life. My parents are in their 70s. I'm getting older, obviously, as everyone is getting older, but my kids are getting older, and it just, makes you think. So I love the visuals. So I'll just use the example of Andrew's verse, but the first verse is just as good. In the eye of the storm, woke up to fireworks in the backyard. Someone playing a guitar, the sun danced along on the horizon. I get, like, I can see it. I can see all those things in my mind when he's singing that. And maybe it's partly the way he sings it. Do you have a favorite part of the song?
I definitely love the drum trick thing that Jesse does, which is, again, very music nerd type moment. I think a lot of the production's really fun. It's like this super tiny thing that they do. I think it's like right before the last chorus. They like crank up the reverb on like the last syllable of hurricane.
Yes.
I think that was super clever. It feels like almost like driving through a tunnel or something.
I know what you're talking about.
I thought it was such a cool like little thing that they did. But yeah, I kind of tend to like pick out these like super specific sonic elements that they add. That was another little thing in that song that I think is really neat. That adds a lot to it.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I think you bring a whole different perspective to listening to music, because there's things that you understand that I don't, things that people who haven't worked in engineering and around a studio and been around live music so much and that sort of thing that maybe we wouldn't pick up on. But you probably notice a lot more of those little nuances and things. I wish I had that more technical ear, but yeah, I love hearing about it though. I love that stuff. So I do love that build back into that final chorus, and I think that was part of it, where he sings, "We were broke, we were brave, 25 years in a hurricane," for the final chorus. It's quite possibly one of my favorite songs from the past few years, to be honest, and that's saying a lot. Let's talk really briefly about the music video. Have you watched the music video?
I think I might have watched the premiere. I think they did something on YouTube for the premiere. I'm not much of a music video person. I tend to like watch them once and then I kind of forget that they are there.
Yeah, I could say something similar about myself. It depends but yeah, I've probably watched it twice, what the time you're talking about, and then recently for this episode.
I
But
meant to watch it again before this, but then I forgot.
that's perfectly okay. There's no homework for this podcast. Like it's all optional.
It was like filmed in the mountains or something, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
Which is super fun. It kind of gets, the whole wilderness vibe, the feeling of, this wide open expanse, wasteland, whatever you want to call it. And Tommy does like a lot of birding, nature stuff, which I'm sure he had a fantastic time filming that and getting to watch birds. So
I did not know that about Tommy, so look, I'm learning all kinds of facts about these guys. I do really like that it's out in the wilderness. Could definitely tell it was filmed kind of during a pandemic. I guess if you showed me this video and I didn't know that, I probably wouldn't have ever figured that out. But like, it just made sense at the time, probably when they filmed it in like late 2021 or early 2022, that you have a music video that has only the 4 people that are on the track in it, and they're out like in a remote area, like not around people at all. So that makes perfect sense. But I feel like it was really fitting. It was very cinematic, beautiful backgrounds, and like you said, they're out in the mountains and the woods. It honestly looked like they were having a good time. Like when you were talking about how the drummer has a lot of fun on the drums. I do specifically remember a part in the video where I'm like, that guy looks like he's having a good time.
Yeah, Jesse is fabulously talented, and he is, you can tell he's having a good time live. So
and that's pretty much what I ask for when I see an artist live. So if they're having a good time, I'm having a good time. I'm going to ask you a question to kind of wrap up here. I find it nearly impossible to name my 5 favorite songs by my favorite artist, so I'm not going to ask that of you. But I am wondering if you can share, like, if there's people listening who don't, and they got this far into the episode and they don't know who Jukebox the Ghost is, but they're maybe a little bit interested. What are some songs that they should go check out?
Jump Started is kind of like the go-to song that I would give
a good
people.
place to
like
start.
If I had to pick one that's like, this is what Jukebox the Ghost sounds like, that would probably be it.
Okay.
You had like mentioned like a Jukebox the Ghost starter pack in like your outline, and so I thought about this very hard. Jump Started was the first one on it. Also from Off to the Races, Colorful, which is one of my personal favorite songs. I used it for part of my like big capstone project. They play live a bunch. I just think it's a wonderful song and everyone should listen to it. From Everything Under the Sun, they have a song called The Stars, which is definitely one of Tommy's apocalypse tunes. It's another one that's like very quintessential. Like if I had to pick like a Tommy written equivalent of Jump Started, that would probably be it. Fun little like parallel, I guess. I have a Spotify playlist called The Flood, and literally the first 2 songs I put on it were The Stars and Dark Blue. So there's a lot of like lyrical parallel you could draw there.
Right.
So The Stars, Ramona from Cheers, which is another Tommy apocalypse tune, but like in a fun way,
That's an apocalyptic tune? I guess I've never.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I've never paid attention to the lyrics.
I think that's one of Tommy's best jukebox songs, and I had to pick a 5th one, so I chose Hollywood from Self-Titled because they always play that one live. It gives Jesse his moment to shine. It is just a fun song. It's very, very playful, a lot of good time. But that's like a starter pack. Those aren't necessarily my favorites.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't want you to list your favorites because that's a huge monumental task, and I didn't want you to have to think too hard. But I appreciate you putting the work in because I asked you ahead of time like to come up with that, and I really appreciate you doing that. So I heard Jump Started, Colorful, The Stars, Ramona, and Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna be a little bit bad and extend on that a little bit.
Oh, no problem. Feel free.
It had 2 of my personal favorites, but I also feel like work well in the context of this episode. They have a song called The Great Unknown from Self-Titled. That's like one of my absolute favorite songs of all time. Very much fits in with like this idea of freedom and wide openness and kind of having the future in front of you. And then there's a song called Adulthood that I mentioned before from Safe Travels that's very thematically, ties in with Wasted a lot. And it's just a real fun song.
I definitely got to check that one. Well, I'm going to check them all out. I think I know Hollywood because of watching their live stream. I don't think they played it at the Bunbury show, but maybe. But I definitely feel like I've heard that song more than once, so maybe that comes up a lot on Spotify. I'm not sure. I mean, I think the whole Off to the Races album and really Cheers, I love that album too. But thank you for sharing that. So I've made my list, and if you don't mind, I'm going to make a little playlist and share that out in the show notes of the
for sure.
Jukebox the Ghost Starter Pack. Should I throw the last two on there too, The Great Unknown and Adulthood?
Why not?
All right, very good. We'll do that. If you're not so much into music videos, if you haven't seen $1 Million Bill's video,
it's a great
you
music video.
Have to watch.
So funny.
I showed that one to my kids. I was like, girls, you sit down. We're watching the new Jukebox the Ghost video, and they're like, what? Because it's such a catchy song, and that helps. But also the video is just hilarious.
That's a good one.
It looks like they just made it on their own, and they were just having fun. They were like, hey, let's go.
I think they pretty much did.
Yeah. Let's grab a camera or a phone and let's just shoot a music video and we'll put it out. That's what it felt like. I've always had intentions of digging deeper into the catalog, and I'm hoping this is going to be my springboard to get me started, and hopefully somebody listening feels the same way. So one last topic here we got to touch on, and I think we kind of glazed over it earlier without saying it out loud. Have you listened to their podcast?
I mean, there's only 2 episodes now, but I have listened to it. I meant to mention that to you to ask if you knew about it.
Yeah, and I love it. It's another one of those things where it helps you feel connected to an artist. Like, I feel like by learning more about them, I'm becoming more invested in their story and their music. It sounds like 3 guys just hanging out together, having fun. I'm really enjoying that. So I'm hoping that they have Andrew on one day. I don't know if and when that'll happen, but maybe one day. For those of you who don't know, the podcast that they do is called Famish, and it's about being famous. You know, like, you're kind of known in certain circles, but you're not really widely known. They call that Famish. I think it's really clever and funny. And they like to use that word a lot too. So, all right. Actually, I lied. There's one more topic I want to cover. But anyway, if you haven't listened to it and you're a Jukebox fan already, definitely go listen to the podcast. If you're not a Jukebox the Ghost fan, you might still love it. But one more thing. Andrew's new album comes out very, very soon.
I love everything new so far. I think it's
pretty diverse.
Excited for a release I've been in a while. I think Stars was my most streamed song of last year, which is crazy because it came out in the second half of the year. But
it was definitely in our top as well.
Skywriting and VHS, I think, are both fantastic songs, but they're all really good. I'm very much enjoying this new sound and kind of, more electronic direction, I guess he's been going in recently. I think it's super cool and very fun.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a new era, especially compared to what we heard on Upside Down Flowers. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. Again, I really appreciate you coming back to the podcast, being on the show. Always a good chat, and I'm so glad we got a chance to catch up a little bit again. So thank you, Chantel.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This is always very fun to get to talk to you.
Yeah, it was a fun way for me to learn a little bit more about an artist that I enjoy, but I do want to dive a little bit deeper into. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity similarly for anybody listening that maybe hasn't gone so deep on Jukebox the Ghost, but they've kind of dipped their toe in the water like I have, and they're like, maybe I should check out more. So I know I will be. So, and I appreciate your help with that. So I think it's safe to say you're a very passionate fan about the music that you love, and I love that. So
thanks.
If you want to contact me, DM me on Instagram or email somethinginthewilderness@gmail.com. If you want to follow in Chantel's footsteps, we have other guests coming up, some returning, some brand new in the next couple of months. I'm really excited about all of that. But until next time, stay up all night and dream all day.